Hello everyone, are you ready for chapter 14? As we continued on our ride that afternoon, Lucas seemed to sense my thoughts were heavier than usual. He leaned forward. There's a story for when you're in a mood like this. No, there's not. There is. Trust me. Lucas smiled and began. Do you remember the story of Rue, the beautiful daughter of a wealthy man who was injured by the overturned cart? Of course. Well, because of his injuries, the man was confined to his bed for a very long time, so much that Rue had to take charge of his estate. Her father had a great deal of land, and she knew nothing of how to manage it all. Finally, she thought of the bear and wondered if he was still waiting in the forest for her to come. The bear had seen her father manage the estate for years, so she was certain he must know what to do. Was he there? I asked. Yes, because he hoped if he was patient that Rue would eventually come. Lucas leaned in. The bear knew of a peasant boy who lived on the land, a boy who had worked on that estate for his entire life. He told Rue to trust the boy, which naturally Rue could only do if she also trusted the bear. But the bear had saved her father, so Rue decided to trust them both. I sighed. And the boy saved the estate for her? Lucas grinned. No, the boy had his own troubles, but he taught Rue everything he knew so that she could run the estate until her father returned. My eyes narrowed. Returned? You mean until her father recovered? If you wish. I nodded at him, then looked away, ending his telling of the story. I was pretty sure he had made it all up, and if he had hoped to make me feel better, it worked. Maybe even if just a little. Thankfully, there were no more problems that afternoon, and by evening we ended up in front of a church in Silua, a beautiful white building with a tower in front that seemed to stretch to the sky. As if he had been expecting our arrival, almost immediately a priest in a long black robe walked out in front and followed my gaze. It's impressive now, but probably around the time you were born, it was struck with lightning. Destroyed a most precious clock. So few people in this town ever know what time it is, except we all know it's time for the Cossacks to leave. No? He started to laugh at his joke, but Ben only grunted. Enough talking, we need to get inside. Of course. The priest pointed to some stables near the church. I believe your delivery of straw belongs there. And he winked at me as he spoke. The church is smuggling too? I was genuinely surprised that the men who preached of honesty and obedience on the Sabbath day would spend other days of the week breaking the law and encouraging others to do the same. The priest gave me a knowing smile and then walked ahead of us. Once we had ridden into the stables, Lucas began tugging at the canvas covering the straw, preparing for us to unload the wagon, so I did the same. As we worked, he said, it was the priests who actually started the book smuggling. When their prayer books were banned and burned, what else could they do? Sorry, my dog is chewing on something. Quit. Come here. It was the priests who started the book smuggling. When their prayer books were banned and burned, what else could they do? It wasn't about breaking the law. It was about protecting the right to pray. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer of my own. Maybe Lucas was a thief, and he certainly was a smuggler, but he was also a nice person who seemed to have a good heart. Whatever he had done, it couldn't be awful enough to deserve the punishment Rusakov surely had in mind for him. But nor did my parents deserve their punishment. And I could not save them any other way. There was no other way. Lucas dug through the books below and found a thin one with a large printed A on the cover, the same as my name. You take this book. It's yours. It's for the priest. I wouldn't accept a book from Lucas, even as I was considering turning him in for handing out books. But Lucas pushed it towards me again. The book is for someone who wants to read in her own language, someone like you. But Lucas, it's an illegal book. Doesn't that bother you? Just because it's a law does not make it right. This is how we fight the Russian Empire, Audra. Words are our weapons, and protecting these books is a noble defense of our country. Join us or don't, but at least understand what we're fighting for and why. He dropped the book in my lap and then jumped from the wagon. He and Ben began hauling books where the priest directed them, covering each stack with straw so that they would blend in with the stables. I merely sat in a corner of the wagon, turning the book from Lucas over in my hands, unsure of what to do next. Since coming to Milda's, I'd tried to figure out what made these books so important. There wasn't much to them, merely a stack of pages with letters scrawled on them, bound into a soft leather fabric or cover. For books like these, the Tsar of the Russian Empire condemned people to death or to a lifetime of imprisonment. I wondered how many hundreds, maybe thousands of smugglers he had punished. And despite that, year after year, the smuggling continued, and I couldn't understand why. Nothing in these pages could be that wonderful, that satisfying. If it were, then all the books my parents smuggled, why had they not ever kept a single copy in our home? If it was so important, shouldn't they have enrolled me in school like Milda's? Shouldn't my parents have allowed me to work with them? I knew the answer, of course. They'd already told me why. They wanted to keep me safe. One more, Henry. That had been my mother's plea. One more year before telling me the truth about anything. One more year before putting a book in my hands and explaining why it mattered to them and why it should matter to me. Always one more year, all to keep me safe. And now, here I was. Could I do what was necessary to make them safe again, too? The priest rested a small stack of books on the side of the wagon, getting my attention. Thinking about your parents? He asked. I nodded. There were no words in my language or the Russian language to describe how much I missed them. The closest phrase we had was as bala pagzula taves, which failed to express my utter emptiness without them. The priest continued. I never met them, but I've heard stories of their work. Your mother collected orders for books and passed the information to your father, who would secretly cross the border into Prussia. We have printers there who gladly take our money to make the books for us. Then your father smuggled the books back here into Lithuania. Their work was exceptionally dangerous, but if they were anything like Ben and Lucas and the other carriers I work with, then I understand why they did it. I stared back at him, hoping he would explain further, because I desperately wanted to know the answer. Yes, I had felt the rush of excitement in getting a single book past that soldier in town, but what did it matter? I failed in my attempts to smuggle since then, and it had left a horrible pit in my gut all day. The priest smiled. Your parents must have loved you very much to care so deeply about your future. They hoped to give you the chance of growing up in a Lithuania that was free, that belonged to our own people. I glanced down. Maybe that was true, but if my parents loved me so much, why couldn't they have made choices to keep us together? Of course I wanted my country to be free, as much as anyone, but no matter what, whether Lithuania was free or occupied, I'd still rather have the chance to grow up with my family at my side. The priest must have sensed my feelings because he added, your parents couldn't stand by and watch our light be extinguished by the occupation. If our country ceases to exist, then who will you be? An orphan to a nameless people, not Lithuanian, not Russian, not anything? That was exactly the problem. I would become an orphan unless I helped Rusakov, helped him destroy the very thing that my parents had worked so hard to protect. I found a book in our home once, I said, keeping my eyes down. Years ago, but I still remember it. Mama snatched it from my hands and told me that books were dangerous. Lucas was passing by to get another load of books. Your mother was right. Books can be exceptionally dangerous. Now I looked up. How? The priest picked up a book from the wagon, one in a simple leather binding with letters on the cover that meant nothing to me. This book speaks of what Lithuania might have been now if we'd been left on our own. Read it and you will see what the Russians have stolen from us is so much greater than simply our land and our lives. What good does it do to wish the things were different? I asked. The Cossacks are here to stay. A few words of protest in a book won't change that. Lucas took the book from the priest and widened it to show me the pages inside, as if that would matter. It's not about wishing, Audra. This is a book of ideas. Someone thought the idea and put it into words on paper. That became a seed, and every time someone reads those words, the seed is planted in their mind too. And it grows, and it spreads, and as soon as that tiny seed of an idea becomes belief, and belief becomes a plan, and those plans begin to change the world. Control the books, and you will control the people. I smiled as I began to understand. Give them books, and the people will control themselves. Control their own future, Lucas added. He started to leave, but I said his name, and when he turned back to me, I asked, with enough books, could we control our future enough to get the Russians out of Lithuania? Isn't that the purpose of the book? Ben had been listening to us and now ducked in. The book gives knowledge, but don't expect freedom from it. The Russians have been here a very long time now. But it could happen. In other words, is there any chance for your parents to come home again? Is that what you're asking? Ben said. I've already answered this. In my lifetime, I've never once seen anyone come back from Siberia. A tear escaped my eye, leaving a wet trail down my cheek. If that were true, then I really had no choice. I couldn't let my parents die in Siberia, not for a few books. I knew what I had to do. Lucas had been gathering another stack of books in his arms and now lowered them again to face Ben. That's not what you've told me before. You've said, don't get her hopes up. We're not doing this to make Lithuania free. We do this just to preserve the idea that Lithuania exists at all. No, Ben. Lucas shouted the words, then calmed himself with a deep breath before adding, I know what you've always said, what you really believe, that books themselves are freedom. Freedom to think, freedom to believe, freedom to dream. Ben had been nodding as Lucas spoke and then said, put 1,000 more hosts of Cossack soldiers on our roads if that's what the Tsar commands. But if I have a book in my hand, I am free. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd get several books in your hands and help this old man unload the wagon. Lucas just grinned playfully as he began piling a stack into his arms, and he glanced over at me. I warn you that once you start carrying, you won't be able to go back to who you were before. Will you help us? His simple question seemed to choke me. Too much for an honest reply. Whatever I did, it would feel to them like I was helping, but the truth is that it was just the opposite. I had to meet Officer Rusakov in 2 days and tell him how to find Lucas. I had to. So slowly, I nodded. She won't help, Ben countered, then faced me directly. A book carrier's work is dangerous. Her life is at risk at all times, even in the moments when she's not carrying books, just as it was for your father. I winced, and Ben continued. You'll sleep in cold ditches, run when your heart threatens to burst from your chest. You'll go hungry and be lonely and more afraid some nights than you can possibly imagine. And more than once, you will ask yourself why you are doing all of this. On the other side of me, Lucas said, smuggling is in your blood, Audra. Adventure is in your blood. If all you want is a simple life, then forget everything you have seen and everything you have already done. You can grow up without ideas or dreams or knowledge of a world any bigger than your own home. Do you want that life? A life of small, safe dreams? She wants to live, Ben scowled. Stop filling her head with hope. Her parents kept her away from all this for a reason, and we should respect that. I stared down at the book in my hands, the one with the single A on the cover. Was that all I'd ever be, just that single scrawled letter? Perhaps the simple life I had laid out for myself wasn't really the life I wanted. That's the first letter of my name, I mumbled. The only letter of my name that I know. Well, the rest is inside that book. Lucas smiled as if he had won some sort of contest again. But when in fact, it wasn't about him or Ben. It was about me. Was it enough for me to simply be a letter A? Maybe it had to be enough. I wasn't ready to risk my life to know the letters that followed it. You can finish the job we're on now, Ben said, but this life isn't for you. If your parents had taught you better, encouraged you to read rather than hiding information from you, then you might have made a very good book carrier. As you are now, I don't think you're up to the task. I am too, I mumbled. When he didn't seem to hear me, I looked up. I can do this, Ben. Or at least I had to, just until I got my parents back. After that, I could return to the life I'd had before, the one where my mother insisted on protecting me from the world beyond my home, where my father believed I knew and understood less than I truly did. I could return to being a girl who stared at the first letter of her name and wondered if there were anything more to her. And that was the problem. More than anything in the world, I wanted my parents back, but I could not return to being the same girl they had left behind. I closed my eyes and tried to contain the emotions rising in me. I'd seen a glimpse of myself as I had wished to be, a reflection of who I might become if I allowed courage to enter my heart or ideas to enter my head. I saw myself as the girl who defied any hold of her future because she refused to acknowledge the limits others placed on her. When I imagined the girl I wanted to be, it was the girl who smuggled books. I looked down at the book in my hand. What do you think? Lucas asked Ben. We really could use her help. And she was good back there on the road. You know she was. She was, Ben grunted at me. But I still don't like this one bit. He hesitated a moment longer, rubbing the scruff on his chin as he considered what to do, and then said, Until I can get you back to Milda's, I suppose you're a smuggler now. All right, that was chapter 14. I'll record the next one in a little bit. We're moving forward. I miss you all. Talk to you soon.